Void Alchemy. How did I come up with that band name? And what does it mean? Let's find out. It was several years ago, in the snowy winter valleys of Colorado, when Void Alchemy was conceived. A dark, atmospheric one-man band that was spawned forth back in 2017. The name Void Alchemy is actually taken from the name of a track by Elysian Blaze, from the album Blood Geometry. It is a masterpiece of an album, atmospheric black metal in its finest sense, and I was totally captivated by it back in my late teens and early 20s, and that album ends with a track called Void Alchemy. But that name has had a deep meaning ever since this musical project first began. Void Alchemy was born out of a period of immense depression, darkness, sorrow, and confusion. It began in the spring of 2017. At that time, I was in a state of deep depression, like most young guys in their early 20s. So what did I do? Well, I started smoking weed. I had a couple coworkers at that time who smoked a lot, and I mean, when I say they smoked a lot, I mean they were massive potheads, man. Like smoking weed every day, and we'd take breaks during the day, and we called them safety meetings because we had to have our safety meetings, So I began to join them in their safety meetings, and I began to regularly smoke with them. This was in February 2017. And I thought the weed was helping with my depression until the springtime came around. And on March 2nd, 2017, oh, that was the day. On that day, I smoked a certain strain of weed that was more potent than I thought it was, and I ended up smoking more than I could handle, and as a result, my brain just completely blasted off to the stars, man. I mean, my mind was taken off of this planet. It was sort of a psychedelic experience in some ways, and at first I was anxious and nervous because I had never been that high before, and I still have never been that high ever since. But eventually, towards the end of that day, I began to laugh it off. Hysterically. Like, I got home, and at one point I was in my room just laughing and laughing and laughing endlessly. And, for like 30 minutes straight, I was just laughing hysterically. And when I'd close my eyes, I'd have this swirling stars in my head. Like, I would see these stars every time I closed my eyes, and they were just swirling and swirling and swirling like a whirlpool. And I was just there, just laughing and laughing. Yeah. So, I did get some excitement out of that. But in the days right after, when I came down from that blazing high I experienced, that's when I noticed the depression and the darkness in here was actually getting worse. And it was getting worse when I wasn't high. When I'd get high, I would feel okay. But when I come down from that high, man, that's when I'd feel super negative, more depressed and withdrawn than usual. I realized that this was actually doing me more harm than good. So I stopped smoking pot. And I also quit the job that was turning me into a pothead as well. No more safety meetings. Nope. I was clean afterwards. By April of that year, I was clean as can be. And then something terrible happened. My grandpa died, which made matters even worse. I looked up to my grandpa very much when I was growing up, so his passing was very painful for me to deal with. And all these things hit me at once. The depression, smoking weed, quitting the weed, the mental withdrawals after quitting the weed, and then my grandpa dies. And at that point, I was faced with what I can only describe as a void, a spiritual void, a darkness from the lowest levels of existence. My reality had completely shifted into something dark and terrible. It was like the frequency of life had been tuned downwards, way downwards, because of everything that had happened. And some part of me thinks it was the weed. There is a spiritual component to weed, and it seemed as if my use of it, me regularly using it, altered my reality, and I somehow greatly lowered the frequency of my life around me. I found myself in this darker version of reality. And the most important thing I turned to in that darkness was my guitar. When I wasn't working at whatever odd job I had at the time, I was locked in my room every day, just playing my guitar constantly, and these new, dark, atmospheric riffs and melodies began to take shape, all spontaneously. And the more riffs I created, the more my reality around me began to shift again. Things began to turn a little brighter. I found a very good job at the Jet Center in my town. And interestingly enough, the Vale Valley Jet Center's logo reminded me of Void Alchemy's logo at the time. And I made friends with some of the people at that job, and I felt this very real sense of belonging there. And that void I was faced with earlier that year began to diminish. That void felt very real after my grandpa died, but the more riffs and melodies I created, the more my reality shifted, and the more the void shrank. The presence of that void began to be transmuted, basically. And while I was creating all these riffs, I began to recognize that energy is very real, and reality is very malleable. That when you feel bad or negative, you're not completely isolated in what you're feeling inside, but what you're feeling inside directly influences the reality around you. In the grand scheme, all life is energy and frequency, and you alter the frequency of life around you based on how you feel and what's going on in your mind and in your soul. And by creating all these riffs and melodies, I began to see that reality around me was shifting, and I was changing the frequency of life around me. The creation of these riffs became an act of alchemy. But instead of transforming base metals into gold, I was transforming base darkness and emotion into spiritual gold. I don't want to say musical gold because I don't see my music as anything amazing. I'm not a master of it. But this form of alchemy I was engaging in was the process of transforming base darkness and emotion into something magical. Thus, Void Alchemy was born. And a better name could not have been chosen for this musical project. What was once just the name of a track by Elysian Blaze became the name for a spiritual journey I embarked on. This spiritual journey has many layers as well, Void Alchemy's music just being one of those layers. While the first Void Alchemy demo was being created, and while I was realizing the truth about energy and frequency, I started practicing meditation and various breathing exercises and listening to binaural beats or brainwave entrainment music to see how that would influence my reality as well. Of course, I didn't become like Buddha, I still have not achieved enlightenment or nirvana or so forth, but I realized that at the bottom of existence, there is the void, that void that I was faced with. And at the top, at the highest levels of existence, there is the divine. And Void Alchemy became based around the process of transmuting darkness, sorrow, and that void into spiritual growth and connection with the divine. The further you are from the void, the closer you are towards the divine. The lower your consciousness, the darker your reality, and the greater that void feels. The higher your consciousness, the better your reality, and the closer you feel towards the divine. So I was engaging in the creation of this new musical project, Void Alchemy, and I was engaging in all these other spiritual practices, the binaural beats, the breath work, and for the rest of that year, 2017, I sought to attain higher states of consciousness without the use of weed or any other drugs, And to be clear, weed in and of itself is not a bad drug, but I found that it only gave me a temporary high, and at that time, I wanted something that was for real. I wanted to actually elevate my consciousness. I wasn't seeking a temporary high anymore. I was on a new path. Perhaps weed showed me that path, but nevertheless, I was on a new path. A path of deep spiritual exploration. And the result of all this was the first Void Alchemy demo, At the Eye of the Cosmic Cyclone, released at the end of 2017. It was a primitive and amateur result of all of the spiritual exploration that I was in the midst of, and the imagery of Void Alchemy all carries deep meaning as well. The cover of Void Alchemy's first demo shows a man sitting and meditating, and the grand purpose of meditating is to expand consciousness and connect with divine energies. The all-seeing eye in Void Alchemy's logo relates to the third eye, the spiritual eye of the higher self that is pried open when one achieves higher states of consciousness. When I created the riffs for the song Traversing the Unseen Horizon, I was in a higher state of consciousness, without the use of weed or anything else. All the binaural beats and Wim Hof breathing, Wim Hof breathwork resulted in the creation of that song. That song stands as a testament to my spiritual pursuits at that time. It's the result of the purification of that void. Throughout the years, I've released more music for Void Alchemy, but I don't think any of it has held up to the music on that first demo. For the full-length album, released in 2022, I re-recorded 2 of the songs on the first demo, At the Eye of the Cosmic Cyclone and Traversing the Unseen Horizon, and the full-length album was named Traversing the Unseen Horizon. But when the album was recorded, I had lost a lot of interest in creating music. The recording quality had improved from the first demo, but the energy wasn't truly there. It's January 2026 at the time I'm making this video, and I've been in the process of re-recording the guitars on the full-length album, as well as remixing and remastering it. I've entered a new wave of musical activity, and my musical activity seems to come in waves, but this could be the final wave for Void Alchemy. Traversing the Unseen Horizon may be Void Alchemy's only album, and honestly, I think it'd be pretty cult if it remained that way. If Void Alchemy only has one album, I mean, some of the most cult and most underrated black and death metal bands only have one album, like one album that they released a long time ago. I think it'd be pretty cool if that was the case for Void Alchemy. But if this is the last wave for Void Alchemy, and again, I don't know for sure, because again, my musical creativity, it always comes in waves. And if this is the last wave for Void Alchemy, then it shall be its strongest and most powerful, as I make these songs sound as best as I can. I'm also doing this because Void Alchemy has been more than just music to me. It's more or less a soundtrack for the spiritual and religious journey that I began back in 2017, right after my grandpa died. And it only makes sense because my grandpa was a religious man himself, and that's part of the reason I looked up to him so much. But at the time when he died, I wasn't religious. I was raised Christian, and during my teen years I went through the whole anti-Christian rebellion, watching all the weird Richard Dawkins, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and all those other guys. I had a friend who'd always show me, new videos of Richard Dawkins and, this other guy, Hitchens or whatever his name was. The atheist movement on the internet at the time in 2011, 2012. I mean, does anybody remember that? Yeah, I got sucked into that, and I went through that whole phase when I was a teenager, and some teenagers go through that phase, but at the time when my grandpa died, I was agnostic. He didn't know much about it. I talked to him a little bit about that, like 2 years before he died, but then I realized, there's some people, especially some of your family, who you should not be completely honest with. So in the year before he died, I was like, yeah, I'm going to church. I'm going to church. Don't worry about me. Don't worry about me. But that phase, though, of questioning religion came to an end when I was faced with that void after he died and after I quit smoking weed. And it's very interesting. In the year before my grandpa died, I told him that I'm going to church and I'm not questioning the Bible. I mean, I believe in God. And I was lying at the time just because I didn't want his last memories of me to be negative. But lo and behold, after he died, that's when I came full circle spiritually. Of course, my beliefs are not the same today as when I was very little, when I was just a little lad. If anything, I think they have developed, and through music, they developed. Through Void Alchemy, especially. It wasn't until after he died when I was faced with that void, and this is a void that I think a lot of atheists and irreligious people are faced with, that spiritual void, the void that's left by being disconnected from the divine above, And speaking of my grandpa, One song on the first Void Alchemy demo, Ascending the Cosmic Abysm, was dedicated to him. So really, that is an important song as well, just like Traversing the Unseen Horizon and Cosmic Cyclone. Overall, Void Alchemy has been more than just music to me. Void Alchemy is dedicated to spiritual elevation and the expansion of consciousness. And during this new wave of musical activity with Void Alchemy, I am deeply reminded of the band's spiritual importance. Void Alchemy's album, Traversing the Unseen Horizon, shall be unleashed once more in the coming days, and the symbolism and spiritual essence of the band will be talked about more in the coming weeks and months. Anyway, until next time, hail the Ancient Ones.